Today's video is sponsored by Picker's Grip. Stop dropped picks and pick rotation while playing with Picker's Grip. Made with all natural ingredients in Virginia. Check out their website to order. When you support my sponsor, this also supports my channel, and it's very much appreciated. Now through Christmas, enter promo code Robert2020 and save 20% off everything site-wide. So if you ate pasta and antipasta, would you still be hungry? I probably would. Hello, I'm Robert. Thank you so much for joining me here in my home studio. For those of you that might be new to this channel, I spent many years working in the MI industry, and I saw a lot of strange instruments come and go through the building during the time that I was there, and still continue to do so today. So I thought that I would share with you a list of some really great but obscure guitar amplifiers that you may not know about. So without further hesitation, let's get to it. Number one, B52 AT100, and also the ATX100. I'm including both of these amps here in the same listing because the ATX is basically just the later generation of the AT. If you've ever been curious about these amps, yes, they are imported, but they were actually, I've owned both of them, so I can attest to this directly. They're built like tanks, and especially in the case of the older generation, these are basically your poor man's Mesa Boogie dual rectifier. They're not a direct copy of the dual rectifier, but they sure sound awfully close. And there's no question that that's where the inspiration came from. In the instance of the ATX100, it was a little bit more of a modern take on the AT100. It had a little bit tighter bottom end, and certainly a little bit more of a boost in the mid-range, but still had a ton of gain on tap. I've always loved both of these amplifiers, and like I said, I've owned both of them, and part of me's thought about buying them again just because there's things about them I do miss. You can find these dirt cheap on the used market, by the way. All tube amplifiers for probably $300 or less. Number two, the Randall Paul Stanley Signature Colossus. Paul Stanley's never really been that much of a gearhead. As far as he's much better well known for his guitars because that's part of their stage presence. But honestly, he just kind of seems to go whichever company is willing to give him the best endorsement deal at the time when the time rolls around for him to negotiate a new contract. And in this industry, let's face it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Paul is a competent enough rhythm player that he is able to achieve what he needs to achieve on stage and in the studio with any number of different brands of guitars. His amplifiers, on the other hand, he kind of seems to tackle in the same manner, and I've seen him using all different kinds of stuff over the years. But the one amplifier that he actually went to the length to allow the company to put his name on was the Randall Colossus. And this is a 350 watt solid state high gain amplifier, and it is a great amplifier for rock, hard rock, and even some modern metal tones. I've had a chance to buy one of these a couple of times in my life, and I've never actually done it. And as a diehard Kiss fan, I keep kicking myself for not doing it. Number three, a Hiwatt Lead 90. Hiwatt amplifiers, of course, are much better known for their amps in the 70s, the great big huge stacks like the the very famous DR103, among others. Hiwatts are known for a ton of headroom, a ton of clean headroom, and of course to be able to take a beating, and they are ungodly loud. However, when the 80s rolled around, that was a much different time in music than the world had ever experienced. And if you were looking for an amp that was the best of both worlds, between Fender clean sounds and Marshall crunch sounds, the Hiwatt Lead 90 may have been it, because it did both of those things very well. The cleans didn't sound identical to a Fender, and the crunch didn't sound identical to a Marshall, but the middle ground that it did cover was a lot of middle ground, and it did so very well. You still see these pop up on the used market every now and again, and if you're looking for a great tube amplifier that does all of these things really, really well, particularly from that vintage era, keep an eye out for the Lead 90. It might be just what you're looking for, and it is a sleeper. Number 4, park amplifiers. Now, I'm sure every Marshall fanatic just rolled their eyes at me when they heard me say that, but the fact of the matter is there is a lot of people out there that don't know this history, and not everybody are Marshall fanatics. And there may even be some Marshall fanatics that aren't familiar with this, because I think it's a cool history. Back in 1965, Jim Marshall entered into a 15-year contract with a British distributor called Rose Morris, and to this day, Jim Marshall has admitted that was the worst decision he ever made, business-wise. And the reason why is because Rose Morris, particularly for their export business, added on a huge export tax that basically priced Marshalls right out of the market and cost them all kinds of sales. Long story short, Rose Morris was just taking way too much of the money. So, in order to continue to grow his business and continue making money, Jim Marshall created park amps. So, park amps was Jim Marshall's way of continuing to build Marshalls, meanwhile circumventing the contractually obligated nightmare that was his contract with Rose Morris. So naturally, park amplifiers sound very, very much like old Marshalls, and they were actually in production up until 1982 when the Rose Morris contract finally expired. Once that happened, Marshall was able to go back to branding all of their amps with the Marshall name, no longer needing the help of Rose Morris. They did revive the brand name down the road to manufacture some inexpensive solid-state practice amps, and I believe the brand itself has since been repurchased and is now actually still in existence, though they have a very, very low profile on the market today. Number 5, the Sovtek MIG-50. This is another Marshall alternative that a lot of people may not know about, and these amps were actually manufactured by Sovtek in Russia. And of course, they are, they were unique because they were smaller, they were more compact, and but they sounded killer. They were definitely, I think anyway, a little bit darker sounding than your typical Marshall Plexi type of sound. But, there's no question it was definitely in the ballpark, and that's what the inspiration was. These do pop up every now and again, so they're not unheard of. However, if you are sitting there scratching your head thinking that you just saw one recently, that is because Electro Harmonics just reissued the MIG-50 themselves here just within the last couple of years. So, doesn't say Sovtek on it anymore. But you can actually now buy one brand new for right around, I believe, $600 or so. I'll post a link to the new EHX MIG-50 down in the description. Number 6, the Crate 50-watt Blue Voodoo. You might be scratching your head there a little bit, wondering what I'm talking about, because Blue Voodoos, either come in 60 watts or 120 watts, and then you can, of course, you could also step up to the 150s and the 300s if you can find them. But the 60s and the 120s are very common, and they're out there everywhere. However, prior to the Blue Voodoo 60 watt, they actually made a smaller, more compact 50 watt head. These are much, much more rare. The circuitry itself, there is a few minor differences. I really don't think they did a whole lot. I've played one before. I've only seen one in person anyway. I've seen a couple of others listed for sale here and there on the interwebs over the years, but I've only actually played one in person. To me, it sounded pretty close to what an actual Blue Voodoo would sound like anyway. Being a Blue Voodoo fanatic myself, that was my very first tube amp, and if you follow this channel, you know I just recently bought one again for myself to replace the one that I gave up many years ago. But the BV50 was a smaller, more compact version that did sound slightly different, though it was definitely in the same ballpark. Very, very cool piece of history if you're into the Blue Voodoos. Number 7, the Fender Jazz King. In 2005, Fender released a new amplifier. This was their second failure at trying to get into the jazz player market. Fender do a lot of things really, really well, but one demographic of guitar players have never been very good about catering to are the jazz players. And that goes all the way back to the late 1950s when Fender came out with the Jazzmasters. Just about every other type of guitar player on the planet is taken to the Jazz Master, except jazz players. Well, unfortunately, almost 50 years later, the new Jazz King didn't fare so well with jazz players either. However, it did have its strengths, because it actually is a pretty good sounding jazz amp. This is a great big combo with a single 15-inch speaker in it, and it has a great clean sound, though it is not your traditional Fender Twin Deluxe Reverb, Princeton Reverb type of clean sound that we all know and love. This one is much, much warmer sounding and a little bit more along the lines of what most jazz players like. Also makes it a pretty good neutral pedal platform that won't color the tone of your pedals on the back end if you prefer to set up your rig in such a manner. The downside of this amplifier, however, is they are big, and this is probably the main reason why it didn't get over with jazz players, is because they're big, they're heavy, and it was an awful lot of amp for a jazz player to lug around. So these actually sold brand new back then for about $700, and you can pick them up on the used market a lot cheaper than that when they do pop up. Number 8, the Randall EOD88. When I put these lists together and do videos like this, I really do try to avoid including the same manufacturers in the same list. But sometimes it's just too hard to do, and I just couldn't leave this one off. You might even be surprised if you follow me and follow my channel. You might even be surprised to hear me mention this amp because this is really an amp for doom players in one sense. Part of its inspiration was kind of the old Black Sabbath, fuzz tone, because it's actually got a built-in fuzz circuit, and there are a lot of doom players out there that really, really like this amp. But on the other side of it, and this is what I do like about it, it is a great rock and hard rock amplifier. Not necessarily the highest gain amplifier in the world, but it certainly has plenty on tap, more than enough gain for what I would use it for, and it's a Randall, so it's, Randall amps I think are built like tanks, and it just sounds great. Plus, it looks cool. But if you're a doom player and you like that loose, sludgy, fuzzy type of sound, this amp is for you. If you're more my generation and you like the 80s shred, hair metal type stuff, this amp is also for you. So, there you have it. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. There is my list of 8 great amplifiers that you might not know about. If you know of any other obscure amplifiers, by all means, please feel free to list them down in the comments section. I would love to read up on them and see what else is out there that I might not know about. In the meantime, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel. It really, really does help out a lot. And the more people that subscribe, the more I am able to continue to provide content to those that would like to see it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.